I have to tell you a funny thing that happened to me when I got on the airplane in Cincinnati yesterday. I had the aisle seat, and I followed the guy in behind me who was this huge man next to me, and I've learned when you sit next to a huge person, get the armrest down quickly. So I pushed the armrest down. He said, "Don't do that, you're hurting my arm, stop that!" And I snapped at him and I said, "I didn't do anything to you." And he said, "My mother just died." So he was really pissed. I didn't know what to do because I didn't think I could leave it there. So we took off and we sat there for about 15 minutes. And then I said, "How'd your mother die?" And he said, "Well, she was an old lady who died a long death, and I was with her for weeks." And I said, "Where you live?" He said, little German town in Indiana. I said, "What town is that?" He said, "St. Meinrad's." I said, "Oh, St. Meinrad's, there's a monastery at St. Meinrad's where United Church of Christ people meet." I said, "I've lectured there a few times." He said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I'm a monk in that monastery." I said, "Well, I'm glad to meet you. What's your name?" And he said, "My name is Hugh Ernst." And I said, "Well, my name is Walter Brueggemann." He said, "Walter Brueggemann." He said, "Wait till I tell the other monks." We had this marvelous conversation, and then we talked about the amazing thing about being able to forgive each other, because we were both embarrassed. I was so glad I said to him, "How'd your mother die?" Because if I hadn't said that, he would have remained the other to me forever. I was lucky that time. I always do that. Now, do you see how this focus on anxiety and other relates to interpretation? Because what the rabbis know that there's more in this tradition than my particular sect or party has yet gotten to. And it will be necessary for me to continue to participate in interpretation and to hear interpretive voices that are unlike my own. And the reason I tell you this is that our tradition, since Moses and Deuteronomy, has been doing this. And Freud, really, as a Jew, really picked it up and went with it. Freud, as a Jew, understood that the healing process is to take into account dimensions of self that you thought you had gotten rid of, and they hover there with power. So the church is the great interpretive arena in a society that is frightened and anxious and violent because God is leading us to a new world, and it does not feel comfortable to us. And we all have our strategies of resistance. So imagine every time the community of the baptized meet, every one of us in some way is processing this unresolved issue of whether and keeping the other away one more day. The church is committed to ongoing interpretation, and what the church knows is that there is no absolute interpretation, the way the Jews know that there's no final solution to the Jewish problem. Final solutions kill. Interpretation gives energy. I'll stop there, and we have a little bit of time for you to respond, comment.
Again, thank you for your interpretation. Whether
Can you hear him?
okay,
Pull that up or stoop down or something.
thank you for your interpretation. If I'm interpreting your interpretation correctly, from last night and today, and in your book, Out of Babylon, you kind of close with this adaptation of the Serenity Prayer about accommodation and resistance.
I'm going to talk about that in the next hour.
Okay, so this may be a question you may answer more in the next hour, but looking at the Deuteronomy example of the Ten Commandments and idolatry, are we at a point in resisting the national security system where, as a church, to have the symbol of that system in our sanctuaries, should we at least replace the eagle with a golden calf?
You might say that. There is no doubt that the idolatry of excessive nationalism is the deepest temptation we have. Every preacher knows that you can criticize almost anything except the national security state. My pastor last 4th of July Sunday simply said in passing in the sermon that sometimes he thinks that American society is arrogant, and 3 people walked out. What? Okay, can you hear me? Thank you. Okay. So yes, and I think that the Deuteronomy 17 about horses and chariots and wives and silver and gold is an allusion to Solomon and the idolatry of the state. I do think that.
I'm so glad that I can be here in this setting and not in your class where I have to worry about getting a grade.
I'm a very fast grader, and I had a young teacher ask me how I could grade papers so quickly. I said, second week in class, I looked deeply into their eyes, and I know. I would say an A minus.
Okay, here's my question. Grew up a Kansas Methodist, went through UCC for about 20 years. Now I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I find I'm trying to proselytize my fellow UUs for the cause of biblical literacy. It's an uphill struggle. I did research on the internet. I found out what most preachers choose from the biblical text to preach from, and it's just a very limited sample. And one technical question I'd like to ask you is, if we ditched 1st and 2nd Chronicles, would anybody notice and would anybody care?
You all know 1st and 2nd Chronicles? My father was a pastor, and one day in Women's Guild, a woman was supposed to read 1 Corinthians 1, which is wonderful. but she read 1 Chronicles 1, which is a genealogy. Well, my answer to that is that somebody thought it was important to put it in there, and we need to leave it there because there will be a time when it will be important again. That's what I think. It's not overridingly important to me, and when I look at my Bible, that part of it is white, no fingerprints. But what happens in the church is that in new time and circumstance, we are drawn to texts that we hadn't read for a long time. So the church in East Germany found the book of Revelation enormously important. There have been people that wanted to get rid of Revelation, and so on and so on. But I wouldn't use my energy with Unitarians trying to get them to read that.
I wanted to bring the conversation up with some current happenings that are going on. And if I'm getting out of a realm that you want to talk about, please say so and feel free. Right now, in our nation's Congress, they've voted on spending bills, and I think that cuts to the heart of what we're talking about as far as the Deuteronomical and the priestly communication ways. What are the values in there? And one of the values that they're voting to cut right now is Planned Parenthood. Just cut all funding for it. At the same time, cutting funding for the health care bill that's going on. With that, I, from a very strong D, in whatever sense that's going to be, form, I see us, we need to care for the widows, we need to care for the orphans, we need to care for the single mothers who can't afford health care and provide them the services that Planned Parenthood would. But other people are saying, one, Planned Parenthood provides abortions, it kills, and two, we need to just slash and cut everything. My question is, how would you get a conversation going, if not on that issue, how would you get a conversation going within maybe the politics range between the P and the D traditions?
Well, it's exceedingly difficult, and I don't know how to do that. But what the conversation needs to be about is the common good, so that the unit of meaning is the community, not the individual. The individualism of that kind is a heresy of market ideology, in which we are all set against each other to get what we can, and the church has to make the argument that the common good is important and it has to be paid for, and those with resources have to pay for the well-being of those who are without resources. This is elementally biblical. I know it has to be argued.
Yeah.
But the church has been preoccupied with such trivia rather than joining issue with these issues. And part of the reason we don't join issue is that the lectionary committee has left out all this stuff. So people don't know it's in the Bible. Mm-hmm. People don't know that Moses kept saying, widows and orphans and ignorance. It's like a mantra. So you and I think alike about that. I don't think you can start with family planning and abortion. I think you have to start with the common good and ask, who's got resources and who needs? Oh, you're talking about the distribution of wealth. No, I'm talking about acknowledging that I have membership in this community and I am responsible for this community. It is so elementally biblical. Okay?
Thank you.
Good.